Good morning, all. Looks like we've got people joining us from all around the world at the moment, which is really exciting. Well, it's great to see so many faces, names, and even videos happening from all across the world. In the chat box, just drop down where you are calling in from. Hi to Laos. We've got someone from Belgium. We've got Vietnam, Hanoi. Everyone, drop in the chat box. Where are you calling in from today? It's a really exciting day where we're talking about some of the most important things related to the Lancang-Mekong and how research can make a big difference. And as such, we want to know, we've got Thailand, Hon Phen from Cambodia. This is terrific. Excellent. It's great to see such a diversity of people and a really nice cross-section. We've also got some people from China, all the way from the top to the bottom of the Mekong. Great to see. Excellent. Okay, so as you know, today is a terrific day from the SUMERNET team. It's part of the annual meeting, and this is the research forum. So we're looking at the Lancang-Mekong Research Forum, and we're specifically focused on strengthening research policy cooperation and partnerships to address water insecurity in times of uncertainty in the Lancang-Mekong region. Now, we've got a really exciting agenda for you, but I'm not going to run through that. My name is Dr. Leonie Pearson. I am the component coordinator for Research for Policy and Practice as part of the SUMERNET program, which is sponsored by CEDA and is driven by the network across the whole Mekong. So if you want to get involved, if you want to know more, please drop us a line in the chat. Someone will get back to you. But at this point, it's time for us now to get started on hearing some of the great discussions that we've got today. So some basic logistics. Please turn off your mic if you're not speaking. If you've got a question or a query or just something you want resolved, put it in the chat box. We've got a whole team of people here, online on chat, online on video, and engaged to try and make this the most successful research policy forum that we've had to date, and also to make sure that you as participants can have a voice. It's really important for today that we hear your questions and we hear your concerns and issues. There are many topics that we will cover, but we would like to hear what your perspective is. So let's be considerate for the fact that we have over 90 people online and we had over 100 people that were registered. So let's use the chat box to put any questions into them. And now, if you could, the last thing I need to say is if you could change your name to make sure that it's got your organization. So if anyone wants to follow up, they know who they're talking to and they know how they can get back involved. Let's now jump in to the opening remarks for an official warm welcome from Dr. Labelle from the SUMERNET Steering Committee. Dr. Labelle, are you available?
Yes, thank you very much, Leonie. And although I only have 5 minutes, the first thing I want to do is really to thank my former colleagues at SUMERNET and SEI, who gave me this opportunity to open this research forum. I left the EU 10 years ago, and I really miss you very much. And following, I would like to share with you 2 points, which I would say the 2 new challenges among many others that we are facing in doing research. And firstly, we are studying the new issues. And these issues are crossing or go beyond the framework of reference, the academic framework of reference, which we have been trained to take or which we have got so used to. And for example, China had a huge rainstorm in July this year and resulted in catastrophic disaster. The rainfall was so big that the amount of rain in one day is much larger than the total precipitation of the entire year. And it never happened in cities, but this year it did happen in the central city. of a province capital. So conventional research framework of disasters management is not really enough to cope with these very complicated issues. And the other example is the issue of COVID-19, which has already gone far beyond the research framework of medical issues, so that epidemic models alone won't generate sufficient findings to help us understand the issue or the question and to help develop sufficient policies or solutions. The social scientists or economists need to expand their respective academic framework or take broader approach in studying the trade-offs of policies dealing with COVID. For example, the question like individual freedom versus health and safety. How do we prioritize these alternatives? So these are, of course, associated also with social, economic, political, and even cultural factors. So such a complexity of the issues being studied were hardly met before when we were doing research, for example, 5 or 10 years ago. As policy researchers, we need to take a broader approach than what we used to take before. And secondly, today, the most of challenging issues being studied are crossing national borders. Therefore, international and regional collaboration in research is more needed than ever. For example, climate change is an issue of human beings crossing national borders. So is the COVID issue we are facing and trying to deal with today. So today, the challenge is more and more political agenda are becoming research barriers. And we, the researchers with academic training, which is more, we should be more passionate for the interest in the lives on the earth and interest in human beings. And we need really to open our arms to embrace the international or regional cooperation. And finally, despite with the information communications technology, which are bombarding us with all kinds of information through social media and all kinds of information channels, we as researchers still should observe one old rule, that is seeking the truth from facts, or as we always say, evidence-based research. This is our professional and this is our job. So as this is what we are doing, we have been doing, and what we are going to present today at this Research and Policy Forum. So in the end, I would wish our forum a great success, and I'm going to participate, listen carefully with high interest. Thanks again. That's all.
Thank you. And thank you for terrific opening remarks. This sets the scene. This is we're looking at a whole river approach. We're looking at transboundary. We're looking at really crossing those both disciplinary, but perhaps even policy boundaries that may have, that really need to be crossed for us to deal with some of the old challenging issues. I'm not sure if that was an audio challenge or at my end or everyone else, but I'd like to say thank you for those great opening remarks. Let's move on to Dr. Louis Labelle from the Unit for Social and Environmental Research to provide us with some context for what we'll be looking at today.
Thank you, Leonie. I hope everyone can hear me. I would like to issue a very warm welcome to our colleagues from China. This is a really special opportunity for us. Okay, now we're behaving properly. Thank you very much. Real warm welcome to colleagues from China. I really look forward to the interaction with you. Some of them old friends from decades ago. This forum in the program, there's 4 objectives listed for the program. And when I look at it, it's really about 2 things. First is to exchange knowledge about how to address water insecurities in uncertain times. And the second major objective is really to strengthen the links and build cooperation that informs decisions and agendas. There are 2 sessions today and a few tomorrow. Today, the first session is about COVID-19 and water insecurities. The second is on the politics of water security under uncertainty. Few comments. What are water insecurities? For example, one type of water insecurity for a household is not having enough water, clean water to drink, or not having enough clean water to wash your hands, even though the guidance from the health office tells you must wash your hands frequently, but you only have so much, and every time you need more water, you have to go and carry it from 2 kilometers away. So one of the projects I was involved in, the Voices project, we looked at vulnerable communities, people living in upland sites, people living in construction camps, people living in formal settlements in cities. And we found that the COVID-19 pandemic had an impact on household water insecurities. For example, if somebody washed their hands a lot, they were almost 2 times as likely to be insecure. In other words, not have enough water for other things. And also, if you didn't have a reliable, good enough quality source of water, you were water insecure, it also made it harder for you to adopt the good practices that the health offices in the various countries were promoting. This is a study done in 5 countries. We'll hear a bit more about it here. So water insecurities can be at the household level, but they can also be issues on transboundary rivers, results of diversions for irrigation or results of holding back water for optimizing hydropower dam cascade performance, etc. What about the causes of insecurities are, of course, therefore very complicated and multi-scale. What are uncertainties? We talk about climate, and we got one example of surprises that Nila talked about in her opening comments, when suddenly you have a lot more rain in one day than there's a whole year's normal level. Another uncertainty, of course, is COVID-25. Who knows what will happen in 2025? Will we have another pandemic, or will we be up to variant Lambda? What is research? Is it social science stuff? Is it only biophysical stuff? What is policy? Is it explicit? Is it values? Is it social? Is policy sometimes a gap where nobody says anything, but that's the de facto policy? So what I'm looking forward to in this research and policy forum is to try to understand, how do policy makers, practitioners, and other stakeholders interact with researchers? Do they lean towards each other a bit more? Do they make the possibility of building links and cooperation that influences decisions, but also research agendas, or not? Or are we leaning apart? And I'm very much also looking forward to see whether the people from China and the Southeast Asia region can lean towards each other a bit more and collaborate more on regional research topics and problems. So how do they do it? Let's have a look. Thank you. That's my opening comments.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Lewis. And I think you were right to highlight 2 points. There are 2 key priorities for today. The first one is to exchange knowledge. So we're here to learn and also to hear different perspectives. And the second one is to strengthen ties. And we're hoping that your questions and comments can help you strengthen ties. Also have a look on who are the participants. Is there an old friend, a colleague, someone that you want to send a message to? And while I want you here so you can hear more about what we're doing today, feel free that you can actually send a direct message to any of the participants here. And you can do that by looking on your chat box and identifying the name that you would like to connect with. So use this chance, an opportunity to connect, to strengthen your ties, as well as exchanging knowledge. So after those two introductory, great opening comments, let's have a quick run through for what today is going to look like. So we're going to have two panel discussions. The first one is going from 1:20 to 2:35, and that's going to be looking at addressing water insecurity in times of COVID-19. We will then have a group photo. So make sure that you're there for that great group photo. We will then have our second panel, which is going to be looking at navigating the policies of water security in times of uncertainty. And after that, there will be some time for some further Q&A, and then we will wrap up and we'll be finishing by 4:30 this afternoon. Now, what that means is that now it's time for our first panel. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and I'd like to step over to our first panel. Our first panel discussion on contemporary dynamics of addressing water insecurity is moderated by myself, Leonie Pearson, and is specifically really focusing on addressing water insecurity in times of COVID-19. So we should be hearing from some leading researchers about what are the challenges that they've been seeing in this particular context. I'm going to run the panel in a reasonably structured way. Each of the panelists is going to respond within 5 minutes to the question, what effect, if any, have you seen that COVID-19 has had on water insecurity in the Lancang-Mekong? And to use some examples from their own research to highlight that. We can then take some questions from the floor. Is there anything that the panelists would like to add, or is there anything further that anyone from the floor would like to ask? Please put your questions in the chat. I can say those out loud, and we can go through. Perhaps if there's time, we can even get someone to turn on a microphone and a video to ask their question. We will then finish up the panel with a quick run around all our panel members to address the final question of the session, which is about what one action you suggest we as researchers, policymakers, CSOs, NGOs can do to address water insecurity across the whole Lancang-Mekong now that we're all living with COVID. So they're the two leading questions that we've got for this particular panel. Now I've got the honor of introducing our esteemed panel members. So we have Dr. Wu Yu-song from the Center for Rural Development Studies at the Yunnan University. We have Dr. Apisom Intrawalan, Mae Fang Lang University in Thailand. We have Professor Nila Ong, part of the SUMERNET Steering Committee and from one of our SUMERNET projects, the Voices projects from Myanmar. Dr. Phan Thuan Tan from An Giang University in Vietnam, and Mr. Chan An Top from Inland Fisheries Research Development Institute in Cambodia. So we're very lucky to actually have a cross-section across the whole Lancang-Mekong here today. So therefore, I would like to say a warm welcome to our whole panel and to everyone. Again, please put your questions in the chat. I would now like to ask our panel members to address our first leading question. The question is, what effect, if any, have you seen that COVID-19 has had on water insecurity in the Lancang-Mekong region? And I would like to start by asking Dr. Wu Yu-song from China.
Good afternoon, Leonie. Can you hear me?
Yes, clear. Okay. Thank you.
It's my pleasure to be here. And I think this is a really interesting questions and very important problems for us to dealing with. And if we just start with the direct action with the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, and look.
I'm sorry, I seem to have lost audio. Has everyone lost that audio?
We couldn't hear.
Cannot hear. I'm sorry, Dr. Wu Yu-song, could you please say something more?
I can hear you loud and clear.
It looks like we've lost Dr. Wu Yu-song. That's unfortunate, as she was just starting to really get into our panel discussion. How about, could I ask someone from the Secretariat to please follow up with that. And in the meantime, I'd like to jump over to Dr. Apisom, if you wouldn't mind, from Thailand. If you could please spend 5 minutes addressing the question about how has COVID, have you seen any effects from COVID on water insecurity?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I would like to talk specifically about one of the projects that are undergoing at Chiang Rai and Mesai Tachilek border. These projects are funded by Lancang-Mekong Cooperation. It aims to develop a baseline data between Thailand and Myanmar on this particular river called Sai and Ruok River. In Chiang Rai, we share this river with Myanmar. So the impact that we got, this is a direct impact, is caused a project delay, on the joint research that we are trying to do with the Myanmar team, because in the COVID, in particularly in Myanmar, is very severe. So our research team cannot administer the household survey in that region. And on top of that, there is a political riot in Myanmar that even make the project very difficult. But however, Thailand side has already finished the household survey on the water security. We assess what Dr. Louis has introduced about the concept of water security, and we define is that the capacity of the population to safeguard sustainable access to adequate quantity and acceptable quality water for sustaining livelihoods, human well-being, and socio-economic development, for ensuring protection against waterborne pollution and water-related disaster, and for preserving ecosystem in a climate of peace and political stability. So from the concept, we unpack the concept and we follow the ADB research framework, which has a 5 component. The first component assessing the household water security, whether they have access to clean pipe water, sanitation, or something like that. The second component regarding to economic dimension of water security, whether they have enough water to farm their land, or they are doing a fishery or an input for industrial production. The third component, we're looking at urban setting, whether the urban has a good planning in terms of wastewater treatment and drainage system. And number 4, we're looking at the environment. So this is particularly looking at river health, like whether the ecosystem service can, the ecosystem can sustain or not, And the last dimension, we look at the disaster component in terms of flood and drought. And the preliminary survey that I can share with you, this is only from the Thai side. We found that the community along the Sai and Ruok River, which is a tributary to the Mekong River, are now facing the drought problem and water shortage problem. And this problem greatly affects their livelihoods. And also, especially during the COVID-19, the community report that they are facing with the water pollution problem from the waste, plastic waste along the river. I can have one picture that I will show you later on. And we ask and we investigate in the area with the multiple teams from the hydrology, land use, policy team, and we found that these problems are increasingly serious due to a growing urbanism, lack of urban water-related planning, deforestation upstream, degraded ecosystem, and transboundary impacts of hydropower development in the region. So I would like to mention to one of the particular finding that I think is very important, especially the seasonal flooded wetland, which act as a food bank for the local community, especially in the hard time, like in the COVID. If they lose their job, they come back home and find fish or bamboo shoot or some kind of food in the wetland. But this wetland is dying. So yeah, I would like to share you a screen, if I may.
Dr. Apisam, we're almost out of your 5 minutes. So
Right.
If you need to share a screen, perhaps, okay, one photo, yes.
Just one photo of this is a irrigation gate. I think this is impacted by COVID, especially, because of we use lots of face masks and we order like Food Panda or whatever, and we produce a lot of plastic pollution. And in the border area like Mae Sai and Myanmar, in Tachilek, for example, these services are not always available. So these plastic waste are dumped in the river, and it increasing the water pollution. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Excellent. And thank you for sharing that terrific image. I think this is an issue about water insecurity than COVID that we had not anticipated beforehand. Excellent. Dr. Wu Yusong, I see you have joined us back. Terrific to see you on board again. Would you like to continue?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Sorry for the inconvenience. And I think this issue relates to the pandemic and the water resource management or water security issues is really important. Maybe from very beginning, it's really hard to find a direct link, or it's not that easy to find a direct link between the COVID-19 pandemic and the water security issues. But if we add one more factor, such as climate change, and we can easily to find the very clear logic between the climate change, pandemic, sustainable livelihoods, sustainable agricultural development, this kind of issues. Because, in fact, I'm from China, I'm from Yunnan, in Yunnan Plateau, and we have a lot of wetlands. And in fact, the plateau wetland in Yunnan, it takes about 50 of the wetland resources in China. Theoretically, in fact, we do not facing the problem of water insecurity. We have a lot of waters, but under the process of the climate change, we also facing the issues like the water shortage and the decrease of the quantity or decrease the quality of the water. So these kind of things, we cannot have kind of good water resources which can provide a good water services before, such as we can use water to drinking, transportation, irrigation, fishing, or we can also use the water resources to help to adjust climate. And we have a lot of waterfalls, water birds around before, and also we have very beautiful scenery before. But under the process of climate change, so maybe some of what we say the intensive agriculture development, maybe the water polluted by some of chemical pesticide, over chemical use, so the water cannot drinking anymore. And we have an extreme case that for the poor households in the local community, they have to use different kinds of water in their daily life. They can only use the water from the river or from the lake for irrigation. They even cannot feed the cattle. So they need to dig the well or use the tap water to have the shower, have the bath, or to feed the animals. And then they need to buy the big bottle of the water for cooking. And even more, they need to buy the purified water for drinking only. So this is really a heavy burden for the poor people, especially in this kind of, the context. And with the process of pandemic and, in fact, Yunnan is kind of traditionally a very good place for tourism. But the tourism industry just stopped. So local people especially, they cannot earn the small money from provide the services from the tourism, or their fishing products cannot sell to the restaurant because many restaurants already shut. So this kind of situation decrease a lot of the money making resources. So the cash shortage also serious problems the local people's facing during this pandemic process. So this caused a new situation is the labor, especially the off-farm labor increased. For example, in one of our research project sites, maybe before only 100 or around 200 young people go out for off-farm labor, but now it's almost increased to 700 or 800 just go out for off-farm labor. So all these young laborers go out, and the communities only have the little children and the old peoples. So the cohesive of the community or the local community governance also has some negative impacts in it. And also for the quality of the water decreased, and people cannot drink the water anymore, or it's really hard for them to find the clean or good quality water. So they also have some sickness, especially the sickness, for example, calculus or the liver cancer always happen in the labor or the people among, for example, 30 to 50 years old. So all these kinds of things combine. So we need to think more about how can we break the virtuous linkage between the climate change, the pandemic, the intensive agriculture development, or the local livelihoods, this kind of issue. So if we have more questions, maybe I can share some of our case studies later on. But I think we do need to find out the linkage between these kind of factors, especially some new situations which have this kind of interlink. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Wu. That's terrific. You've brought in the wider social, economic perspectives in the issues around water insecurity. I'd like to move on to our next panelist, Professor Nila from Myanmar, who's also part of the SUMERNET Steering Committee. Are you available now for 5 minutes to address the question, what have you found about COVID and its link to water insecurity? Professor Nila, are you there? If you are, we cannot hear you. It's always a challenge when we have so many people online to keep the connection strong and viable. Professor Nila, terrific.
Hello.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Sorry for inconvenience because my internet is interrupted. So, good afternoon, everyone.
Professor Nila, I think we have just lost you. Can anyone else hear? No. Okay. Unfortunately, we can't hear you at this point. So I might, let's jump across to our last panelist, Mr. Chan An Tob from Inland Fishery Research Development Institute in Cambodia. Are you available to talk to us as part of the panel today?
Yes, I'm here.
Excellent. Thank you.
Dr. Leonie, and welcome to because the internet problem. Just a moment, please. Internet. Let me so.
Turn off your video if you have an internet problem.
Yep.
Sometimes just audio works better.
Oh, audio work better.
Perfect. We can hear you clear now. Thank you.
Okay, so
We seem to have lost you again. Okay. So it now looks like we've lost both of our panelists. I'm hoping perhaps Professor Nila, have you been able to rejoin us and connect back in? No? Okay. I think what we should do then at this stage is actually ask if there are any question and answer that anyone has. I guess even though we only have 2 panelists, and I'm looking to my team here as part of the Secretariat, is that, that they are able to support us in this, but and let us know when our other panelists come back on board. But in the meantime, I guess I'd like to ask both the panelists that have spoken, Dr. Wu Yu Song and Dr. Apisom, if there's any clarifying points that they would like to make, or are they happy to go to questions at this stage? If our panelists could please turn on their video, if that's possible, just so we can see them, that would be great.
Oh, Leonie, maybe I can add one more issues I forgot to mention during my previous presentation is, in fact, we just follow up our previous case study sites, and we just follow up some of our local peoples, and we found because of the water shortage, so there are some already currently conflict relates to the water resource use already happened, or some potential water resource use. For example, some of the upstream villagers, they were provided the tap water before, but because they do not have enough irrigation water from the downside, so they just stop the tap water, or the people can only dig the well. So these kind of things links not only for the water resource management issues, but also links to how the climate change and links to the water scarcity, and this how linked to the the water use conflict issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. That's a very interesting case. I appreciate you sharing that. Great. Professor Nila, I see you are back online. Would you like to now talk with us? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Sorry for inconvenience. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm involved in the voice projects that was lead from Dr. Lewis, and also I am as a country partner, and just like other Mekong countries. I would like to share my experience about our voice projects. The main thing is like a developing countries, Myanmar, we face the water insecurity problem in COVID pandemic periods. We look at people face both in quantity of water, insufficient of water. In the normal time, we get our country is one of the famous country for the climate change pressure countries. That's why we already in the normal time our people face the water insufficient problem. In the pandemic time, the people from we selected from the mountain area and coastal area, and also informal settlement area, especially for vulnerable community who involved in the oldies and women's, and also informal settlers, and also landless people. After hearing the voice of the people like the vulnerability from the vulnerable community, and also as like boundary partner from General Administrative Office, and also water supply, and also staff from the Ministry of Health. We knew about a lot of information, and the people who faced in the many issues in COVID pandemic era, the period. I would like to I would like to highlight 3 points. The first one is, we, as I mentioned earlier, we in normal time, we already face the water insufficient problem. The people is from the vulnerable groups. They suffer more than the earlier. That is not, how to say, that is very normal. But in what we learn from the WISE projects, we need to hear more voice from such kind of local people. In Myanmar case, our government established organized the Central COVID Committee, and they support for the poor people in terms of the goods. But for those vulnerable people, most of them are the informal settlers and also oldies, and also they live in informal settlement. They have no legal registration in the administrative department, also general administrative body. That's why they couldn't get such kind of support from the government. That's why they have a big family and they have a low knowledge about the personal hygiene. Also from the government, how do they practicing about how to wear the masks and how to make the hand washing. From the vulnerable group, and even in just ordinary people, they are difficult to follow because of their knowledge and because of their infrastructure. Here, infrastructure I mean the water supply infrastructure. As you all know, like the developing countries, Myanmar, we only support from the government side, water supply side, 27% of water source only support from the government, the water supply. And the rest the rest from the local people have to use tube well waters, river water, and also even pond waters. That's why in our study area, in coastal area, one of our people told me that they have to use their spring water. They pass through the agriculture area, and also the water quality is not qualified, but they have to use for them for cooking and also household use. Even they practice the hand washing, water quality is questionable. That's why this group is very, very vulnerable for the we had from the voice from these people is very vulnerable, and they face the water insecurity problem within the COVID pandemic period. The another point I would like to suggest is the implemented points. We make an in-depth interview with the county partner, like general administrative projects officer. Because according to our administrative body, we have a 6 hierarchy from national level to village level. That's why the policy pass through from the national level to village level, we have to pass through 6 levels. That's why most of the policy regulation was irrelevant to implement with each village and each area, the whole Myanmar, because of given situation of infrastructure, and also based on the human capacity, and also the environmental situation is not relevant with some policy regulation. That's why what we learned from the WISE project is we knew about the policy gap between the implementer and policy regulation. That's why I would like to suggest, according to my experience, our researcher, we hear the most voice from the local people, and also our boundary partner. After hearing from that, we need to support the policy maker or researcher about the knowledge based on our experience. Thank you very much. This is my experience about my project.
Thank you, Professor Nila. That's terrific. We have now heard from you looking at things from a minorities perspective, identifying the vulnerability associated with issues around water insecurity, and these are heightened in these COVID times. I would now like to throw to our final panel member here today, which is Mr. Chan An Top from the Inland Fisheries Research Development Institute in Cambodia. Are you online now?
Yeah, I'm online now. Everybody clear my voice?
Thank you, very clear.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So from my point of view, I would like to address regarding the border insecurity. It would be great if we can divide two parts. One part of the large-scale water insecurity and a small-scale water insecurity. Because from now on, each country from from China and Mekong country member focusing on the competitive advantage of water storage for the industrialization, for electricity supply, and also for agriculture expansion purpose. Maybe also related to the agriculture export figure that each country would like to have more water for industrial and also for agriculture purpose. So this is a part of the transboundary water resource management or integrated water resource management that from the each country that leader from each country need to focus. But I think each country plan to expand the development plan for irrigation and hydropower dam, and this it would be affect for the fishery and environmental of the Mekong region that related to Lancang and Mekong policy figure in the near future. So each country have their own ambitious plan for water storage or water harvesting. So the large scale of water harvesting, it would related to the basin development plan that would have a negative impact for fishery and the river ecosystem. That is the key point. And for the small scale, we can look at the figure or the opinion with the small local community. For example, we are working with the LARIC and the SUMERNET Research Fund, that we working with the highland community that have less water for consumption and also less water for to promote the aquatic animal in the highland area. Because of the flood or the rainfall drop rapidly, and it related to the forest lodging, that there is no much water at the highland area because of the illegal forest cutting, also the related to the forest management in each country that below much aspect of the forest, and it would relate to the less water in the region. So in the local community that we talking about perspective of the small scale water insecurity, that people at the community area, they will lose opportunity to expand their economy. If we're talking about relation between COVID for Cambodia, Myanmar would be have and Laos also maybe have a large impact for the poor people. In fact, Cambodian migrant worker return from Thailand, return from Malaysia or from another country, that those migrant workers went to work to find job for their livelihood. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, they are come back or return home according to the government policy, return home to welcome our citizens back home. So they are less skilled, or they not might have a technology or skill in their mind to improve their livelihood when they return home. They also got the instruction for isolation to stay safe from other, or to make sure there is no COVID-19 impact or spreading in their community. So these are the point that the small scale water insecurity related to the COVID-19. So the poor people, they will stay home according to the local authority to manage the COVID case. So that is another point that loading the difficulty for the poor, for the people that have no much skill or they have a less income. This is a point that we will reflect about our research project. Our research project is not related to the COVID impact or a pandemic, but we seen the migrant worker back from Thailand or from Indonesia that they need to expand to make their livelihood better, but because of no job, have a small farm, and also impact of the restriction of the traveling. So there are difficulty in life. So that is a situation that we've seen in the rural area. So at the highland area also, there is no sanitation water or the clean water for drinking. The local authority and the farmer need to build a pond, make the pond that can collect rainwater, also some groundwater, to make community have opportunity to get drinking water. So this is the point that we can provide the indication for the policy development, that if we have the pond, drinking water or safe water for drinking, but also they can propose to do the aquaponic or to do the farming or greenhouse farming. That would be great for those people that they are migrant or they are come back from the working at the overseas as a worker to get income. So it is another point that we can look into for the small scale water insecurity, how to support the small poor farmer or the small, very vulnerable community. So this point that we seen, and as our member panel member also address, people at the local community, they doesn't have the enough money to buy alcohol to clean their hand. That is the point, because one bottle of alcohol to clean hand is about $1 per bottle, and you know there is no income for them. It is difficulty for 5-member family to pay maybe 3 or 2 days $1, because the poor they are not have much money. So it's another pressure during the COVID, because of now we need to live with the COVID. We need to be careful. So not only the rich family, but also the poor family.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chanandro.
Health security instruction. So that is another, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe you've touched on a number of topics there that are really important for us and for our panel to talk more about.
Sorry.
Yes, so we've got a couple of questions from the floor now, and I think it's a great chance for us, well, now that we've got our 4 panel members there, thank you very much, a great chance for us perhaps to address just 1 or 2. I'm really actually excited to see that we've also got some of the questions raised from the floor being answered from the floor. So it's good to see that exchange of knowledge that Dr. Louis Labelle talked about right at the beginning. But the question that I wanted to ask is, we have a number of them, as I said, but the first one is from Dr. Borapat, which asks on suggestions on ways or what can or should researchers do to engage in water-related to engage the private sector more to address issues of water access among vulnerable groups. I know that a number of our panel members have raised the issue about vulnerable groups, and so the question is open. What would you suggest, panel members, for how to engage the private sector in some of the solutions? Dr. Nila, Professor Nila, would you like to address this question?
Sure. Please, may I hear from the questions?
So the question is, how should we, or what could the private sector do to address the issue of water-related insecurity or water access among vulnerable groups?
Yes, it is very important question. Thank you very much for asking. Based on our country situation, most of the vulnerable people, they have no, as I mentioned earlier, they have no regular official registration in the relevant area. That's why they couldn't have any support from the government, any support from the infrastructure, and also social welfare and something like that. That's why this is the most important problem for them. That's why based on the results of the voice projects, we already write the suggestion about this vulnerable group to solve the problem about water and also other infrastructure to help for them. We already write the report, and we already informed into the General Administrative Office. From those kind of the officers, they have to suggest or report on the national level. That's why to consider about the facts, when policy regulations and how support for the such kind of group. And normally we have a no systematic infrastructure about the water supply. That's why we may face the problem in every part of most of the part of the country. But for the such kind of information, we researchers should learn more, and based on our results, we need to inform the officer and also a policy maker of the national level. This is my suggestion.
Thank you. This is terrific, involving both private businesses and the government in the solution. I see there is a hand up. Dr. Louis Labelle, would you like to add to this comment or ask a separate question?
I'd like to add to this comment from Nila.
Thank you.
Based on the interviews that Nila did in Myanmar and our colleagues in Laos, Phumexai did in Vientiane, it was clear there was two things you have to be careful with the private sector. One is to make sure they don't overcharge for drinking water, for example. So one of the roles of the government was to make sure that the private firms don't overcharge. So that's on the second side, of course, is the private sector's distribution networks are still really important in getting drinking water supplies to people anyway. So as long as they don't overcharge, I think the government should be quite happy to allow special movement during the critical periods, allow vehicles transporting water to reach all the different sites as needed. So most of the places we studied in the city areas, the water supply for drinking is done by state enterprises or private companies already. So it's partly privatized already across countries. And that's all.
Terrific. Thank you. And you're right. The delivery of water to our communities across the Lancang-Mekong, so across our borders, has both a government and a private sector requirement. So both need to be working together. Is there any of the other panel members that would like to address that question? Please open up your camera so we can quickly see you.
May I add one more point? Okay, I think the private sector plays more and more important roles relates to the water resource management issues. And as you may know, the people live around the water resource or watershed, they also do a lot of the, what do we say, the conservation, ecosystem conservation. And we can consider this kind of, what do we say, the payment of ecosystem services. And because the private sectors, they gain the benefit from the water resource management. So especially at this pandemic period of time, maybe this kind of private sector, they can help for some of supply chain, because the local peoples, it's really hard for them to transfer their products, local products, to the outside world. It's do not like before anymore. So maybe the private sectors can help for this kind of supply chains. This is one thing. And another is also the private sectors can, for example, for the tourism company, some of them are also private ones. Before, maybe they do not involve the local people to join this kind of tourism services. During these pandemic situations, maybe they can help to involve more local people to join this kind of ecosystem tourism services, and to help to make a better living or better livelihoods, income generation. I think a lot of things the private sectors can help with, especially during this specific time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great to hear. Can I ask, is there a private sector that works across from the top all the way to the bottom of the Mekong, Dr. Wu, that you know about, or that any of our other panel members know about? Is there one integrated private sector operator?
I think there are a lot of, Chinese enterprises have the overseas investment in the Lower Mekong country. It's not only for the hydropower issues, but also for the mining, for the agriculture, also for some other, especially currently, I think, this type of industry. So it's not that difficult to find this kind of enterprises. And I think it's also the high time for us to encourage the private sector for their, social responsibilities, right? To help the local people, both upper and lowers, and especially to overcome the problems of the challenges they are facing at this moment. It's not that difficult to find.
It's an excellent point. Dr. Huan, who is a longtime supporter of SUMERNET, has raised in the questions the point that private sector can be engaged for both profit and for their social responsibility or for their charity options as well. So a big thank you for everyone for participating and contributing to the question about what could we ask the private sector to do more of. I'd now like to swap tacks, because in answering that question, it was really obvious that we have an issue with our local communities. And one of the questions that's been raised by Nguyen Duc Kien is firstly to thank all the panel members, and I should totally agree with that. And the question is, the impact of COVID-19 on many sectors, including water insecurity, is obvious. But could panelists share their experience on how to get community better prepared for recovery for post-pandemic? Whatever that might mean, the post-pandemic world. But this is, I think, a great question. From the local community's perspective, what should we be doing to help the communities be better prepared for the post-pandemic? Would any of the panel members like to address that directly?
Yeah, can I have some sharing? Yeah, so from Cambodian perspective, I think after COVID case, or we can say pandemic recovery in Cambodia, we have some point that we can share to another country. Might be good for the to help the community. In Cambodia, Royal Government of Cambodia, we have established a national committee for the ecotourism management and development. This joint committee from the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Tourism, Ministry of Rural Development, Ministry of Agriculture, and participation from the governor. This committee has a mandate to promote the tourism after COVID pandemic. That is in kind of the COVID recovery action to have the tourism, ecotourism in Cambodia, that would have the investor from overseas to investor from the point that we would to expand of the ecotourism that can have the poor community. And another point that it would be great to have the future electricity supply is a clean energy, or we can say solar energy for the community that living far away or residing far away from electric supply from the government. So if we have the solar energy initiative, we can say the Mekong Lancang solar initiative, that would be great if the panel or the each country from the researcher perspective, we can establish another initiative, for example, like the Mekong solar initiative that can have poor farm to access for electricity supply, and also we can have the poor children to improve their education and drinking water or for agriculture activity, because the solar energy also can have,
Thank you.
that is from,
Great. No, that's a really good point. The fact that we have different locally based industries that would have an important role in that post-pandemic recovery. Could I ask Dr. Apisom, perhaps if he might have some points to add on this, what could we be doing with our local communities to get them ready for post-pandemic? I mean, I felt his picture of the garbage in the irrigation gates was really powerful. So what do local communities like that need to be doing, and how can we help them to be ready for post-pandemic?
Well, on my view, I think the pandemic is kind of the wake-up call. But we are facing a greater threat in terms of biodiversity loss. Like my research has shown that, like for example, the wetland loss, it has a implication on the rural people who usually work in Bangkok, for example, and when they are unemployed and they come back home, right? And then they found that there is no fish in the river and there's no fish or water in the wetland. So that has an implication to them as well. So I think, of course, in terms of the linkage between water and COVID, like for example, the plastic pollution, we need a coordination among two countries like Thailand and Myanmar in that case, in that Sai River. But I think overall, we may have to shift our economy to integrate like natural solution, natural-based solution like restoration of wetland, because I think it's not only helping to provide food and water to the local people, it's also helping to combat the climate change, because wetland are sequestering carbon, and it's a carbon sink. So I think wetland also provide cultural service and tourism. So restoration of river or wetland might be an answer for now. Thanks.
Thank you. Terrific. Okay, so we've heard any other panel members would like to add on working with local communities for a post-pandemic recovery? Okay. That's great. Okay, so I see we've got another question about from the floor. It's actually from Dr. Chayanis, who is the program manager for the SUMERNET program. And she was reflecting on the participants in the panel. And the question is, how did you find the communities tried to adapt to the situation, considering more challenges on COVID and climate change? So it's that duality of COVID and climate change together. And do you think that without any support from others, that communities could cope with both the short-term challenge of COVID and the longer-term challenge of climate change? I'd like to ask Dr. Wu Yusong, if you would like to address that question, and then any other panel members.
Okay, thanks. As I mentioned before, in fact, local people already try to use some adaptation approach to solve the problems that pandemic caused. For example, if they cannot get enough money from for example, the fishery production, so they have to go for off-farm labor. But in fact, they also facing the big challenges because, this situation is not only the local situation. In fact, this kind of pandemic things is covered everywhere in China. So, even in the urban area, it's also very hard to find a job, and especially to find a long-term job, and also the payment for the local community, because they do not, they lack of enough training, so they can only find a job for the labor use, very basic labor use, and this always have very low payment, or maybe they have to work the longer time than before. So a lot of challenging on security, but anyhow, they try to use farm labor to dealing with the situation that they cannot have enough income generation from, the water resource management, from the fishery, these kind of things. So already have some, but still a lot of challenges facing. So I think because in fact, due to the limitation, we do not have very in-depth research related to the pandemic and the linkage with local livelihoods and linkage with climate change in very in-depth research. So I do hope maybe in the future, one is we can have some knowledge sharing among the Mekong regions and Mekong countries to do some comparative research to see what kind of impacts the local community have from the climate change and also from the pandemic, and what kind of specific issues. Some may be common, some may be different. So we can do some comparative research, and also we can learn from each other, because anyhow, I think each government, each country government, or each local private sectors, for example, they also do some approach, try to helping the local community to overcome from this, pandemic issues. So we can do some comparative research to see what is more effective and efficiency, and then to try to learn from each other. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. That is terrific. I guess you said that we should learn from each other and hear about some cross-country collaborative research on the topic about COVID, water insecurity, and climate change. I'd like to ask Professor Nila if you would like to respond to this question about how do we support communities to cope with climate change and COVID, as that's exactly what your Voices project has been involved in. Professor Nila, would you like to share some experiences here?
Thank you very much for the questions, and also I would like to share about the community overcome the challenges. And also, as I mentioned earlier, most of the community we already have some water insecurity problem, but infrastructure is very low. That's why what we learn from the COVID area, most of the community local people we have a more strength, more cohesion between each other. They have to, if there is insufficient waters, they support water to bring the water from another area and to support for them. And also what of the kind of adaptability of the water local people in the Bugli area, whenever the water is not available for the drinking water available for them, they have to use the river water and boil and for drinking and also for cooking. And also another point I would like to suggest is because of the as you all know, because we are after the COVID, we might have some political instability. we have to struggle, our communities have to struggle ourselves whenever we need. That's why we can take care each other whenever we need water, food, and also even in some household goods. That's why the benefit from the COVID is we can, we can support each other and to overcome not only for the climate change, but also for the water insecurity, but also for the other bad situation in our community. This is my point to highlight that. Thank you.
Thank you. That is terrific. Any other panel members would like to address this question? And I should mention, we just have our last panel member has just joined us, Dr. Phan Nguyen Van from Water Savings Joint Action Project in Vietnam. So if you would also like to answer this question about how local communities are addressing climate change and COVID together, that would be great. Okay.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Do you hear me?
Great. Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry for joining late because of the electricity in my hometown. So sorry about that. Regarding the COVID situation and how the local community address the issue of COVID. As you know, the COVID situation is very complicated in Vietnam for the last 3 months. And for the local people living in the rural area, because after the social, after the big city allow the labor from the big city come back from the rural area, so they also the big problem there. But the local farmers, local people in the community, they realize what the effect of climate change, and they also see the problem of how the effect of climate change on the water resource. And in my project, they would like to work with us on the issue of how to save the water for the water resource for the whole community. So I think I will add some more answer later. I can catch up when I can catch up. So sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. And it is great to see you joining us. And we do appreciate that across wherever you are coming in from, that there are technical challenges. And thank you everyone for putting the time and effort to be with us here today. Okay, we are coming towards the end of our panel, and I'd just like to tell everyone that in the chat box, we have had an excellent set of discussions that have been happening along with the great discussions that we've been having verbally here in the panel. There's been some questions about what can we do about plastics and some answers provided. There's been some challenges raised about the use of pesticides in agricultural practices, and there's been some responses around government initiatives, different farming techniques that can be provided. There's also a nice link that's provided by to have a look at aquaculture livelihoods and the impacts of COVID-19 across 5 different countries. So just to let you know that this idea that we're here to both exchange knowledge and to strengthen our ties is really happening. And it's really exciting to see. So in these last final moments, now that we have 5 panel members, I would like all of our panel members to address this burning question that I think many of us have online, which is the real question, which is what one action do you suggest that we as participants here today, as researchers or policymakers, CSOs or NGOs, should we do to address water insecurity across the whole Lancang-Mekong now that we are living with COVID? And in my notes, I've said, can each panelist just talk for 1 minute And the idea is just to get your best thought or idea on what's the one action that we could all do to improve or address the issues of water insecurity across the whole Lancang-Mekong now that we are living with COVID. I'm going to go back up to my list of panel members and start by saying, Professor Nila, would you like to start us off?
I'd like to suggest one action is we need to know in our based on the conditions of our country, we have know the systematic data, statistical data about the water consumption and also water resources for our people. That's why even though we have we did research about at any institution, many institutions, but the collaboration between the institution is very failure. That's why we need, firstly, we need to have the action is we need to have a basis data for statistical data for water consumption and water resources. That's why I would like to suggest that we need to have such kind of the research work as an action for Myanmar. Thank you very much.
Excellent. So we need better integrated data. I love that. Okay, Mr. Chan An Tob from Cambodia, what is your one action that you would suggest to all of us?
From Cambodia, I believe the plastic, and it would be the one issue in the Mekong region. So it would be great if we have the research platform for plastic, Mekong plastic removal initiative. That would be good for the our river health, also for the people that eat fish in our Mekong region, because many people that they love to eat fish, like Cambodian, Thailand. So if we can action for that one platform for this one, it would be great from my opinion. Yeah.
Thank you. Excellent. So one action is that we get some really good research on Mekong plastics and energy health. Thank you. Dr. Apison, what is your one action that you would suggest to all of us?
Well, as a researcher, I think we need a comprehensive planning, like including a trade-off between and within the country. I mean, between country and within the country, between sector. Also, I think we are focused too much on supply management and very little on demand management. I think maybe we have to improve efficiency, especially on the agriculture sector, using less water, but having more yields or more value added, and also probably implementing a water footprint labeling, or carbon footprint or whatever, so that is my thoughts. Thank you. Also local participation as well. Yeah, because I think water has a multiple use, and especially in Thailand, fishery sector has often been ignored. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. I think you snuck in more than one, but I think you've touched on some great ideas here. We need cross-sector and cross-country collaboration. We need local participation and also some work on demand management as well. Dr. Van Pham Thanh, would you like to provide your one comment, one action suggestion for all of us?
Yeah. Thank you. For me as the researcher and also the living in Vietnam, the country in the downstream of the Mekong River. So one action I would like to raise is give us a chance to talk, to share what we are going here, working in the community to see how much work, how much hard we have to work to serve the water. So give us a chance to share. Thank you.
Excellent. That really reiterates our theme for today, which is the exchange of knowledge and the strengthening of ties across the whole Lancang-Mekong. So thank you for that. I would now like to go to our final panelist, Dr. Wu Yu Song, and ask for her perspective on what one action would she suggest.
Thanks, Leonie. I think one is because I think COVID-19 pandemic is a new perspective for us to conduct research related to the water security issues as well as climate change. So I think we all need more in-depth research, and we also need more information to support our understanding and our arguments. And so I think maybe we need some collaborations among these 6 countries in the upper and the lower Mekong, and to share the knowledge we can gain from our research. This is one. The second is, I think we really need kind of network, kind of informal network, because I think due to the pandemic, most of us out of this kind of linkage or connections for a long time. And I really cherish this kind of knowledge sharing. So I think after this, I feel a bit exciting to see old friends here, and we share the knowledge, informations we can gain from each other. And we hope this kind of network or this kind of sharing, what kind of platform we use, we hope this kind of sharing can be continued, and we can have a room to share the information and to know the concerns and know the approaches, effective approaches we have conducted in the upper, both in the upper and the lower. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so our one actions range from continuing really what we've started today, the exchange of knowledge and the sharing and the strengthening of ties across the whole of the Lancang-Mekong. And I feel like our panelists have reiterated that a number of times. This is exciting because and I'll refer to our chat again, as referred to in our chat, there's work happening at different places. So as we know, the SUMERNET program is something that tries to enhance and support this sort of collaboration. The MRC has got some projects going on in similar sorts of areas, and there's other places. We talked about the LMC as well, doing work and projects across these regions as well. So it's really great to see that we have this funding available, these opportunities available. However, this informal network, how do we keep this going, is a really good question. And perhaps that's something that we might like to think about over today and tomorrow, knowing that today's session is about research, but it's research for policy, and tomorrow's session is about policy being informed by research. So at this stage, I'd like to thank the whole panel members. If it's possible to get the slide up with all of our panelists back on there again, because I think we've had an excellent start to the day. We've had some really strong opening remarks about the importance of today. And I think our panel has just reinforced the fact that everyone here has something to add. Our chat box has seen the asking and answering of questions, and our panel members have really addressed head on the issues around how do we, that's looking a bit crazy. Really the issues around the dynamics of addressing water insecurity when we're talking about times of COVID. So thanks for all the panel members. A big thank you. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you took that opportunity for a 5-minute rest, because I certainly know that after that great discussion and that really good panel, I just need a moment just to reflect on some of the learnings that we had. There's too many to recap here, but I'd also like to say that we didn't actually address all those questions. Whilst our panel was terrific, and a big thanks to the panel and the questions and the chat box, not everything was addressed in that session. And so we'll hold those over, and maybe we'll get to those a bit later. But one of the questions that was asked was about the political context. And I think that's an excellent way to transition into our second panel for today. So I would now like to introduce our moderator for the second panel. The second panel is on navigating the politics of water security in times of uncertainty. And our panel moderator is Ms. May Ong, and she's from our SUMERNET Secretariat. May, are you there?
I am.
Terrific. Are you good to go?
Good to go.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining this session. And as Leonie said, this is the session called Navigating the Politics of Water Security in Times of Uncertainty. So if that's the session you wanted to attend, you are at the right session. The session is about looking at the political context of water insecurity and looking at high-level political tensions and different issues around water diplomacy in the Lancang-Mekong Basin. So we have an excellent lineup of panelists today who specializes in studying the politics of water security. So before I welcome the panelists, let me start with a few housekeeping things. So the session is from 12:50 to 4:05, and I will be moderating the session. We will have a Q&A session, but if you have questions along the way, please feel free to pop them in the chat. We've had a really great set of questions and discussions in the chat in the previous session, so please continue that. The way the session is set up is the panelists have been given prompts to talk about water insecurity and political context in the region. So they will talk about political trends, different strategies that have been taken thus far to water diplomacy, and they will give you a brief spiel about their perspective on these issues. And afterwards, we can go straight into the Q&A. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome the panelists. So we have Professor Liu Jing from Yunnan University. He is a professor at the School of International Studies, and he has been engaged in the Lancang-Mekong water issues through research, dialogue, and training since 2006. He has undertaken several research projects, written academic papers, blogs, and essays, and actively engaged in discussions on issues related to Lancang-Mekong water from nature, social, and political perspectives. So welcome, Dr. Xing. Next, we have Dr. Bat Tan Sin, who is currently an associate professor of the associate partner of Viet Insight. He received his PhD in social environmental science from Aalborg University, Denmark. He is currently the co-chair of the steering committee for SUMERNET and the founding member of AsiaLIC's Innovation Study Network since 2004. So welcome, Dr. Sin. Next, we have Dr. Carl Middleton from Chulalongkorn University, Thailand. Carl is the Deputy Director of Research Affairs on the Masters in International Development Studies and the Director of the Center for Social Development Studies in the Faculty of Political Science, Chulalongkorn University, Thailand. His research interests orient around the politics and policy of the environment in Southeast Asia, with a particular focus on environmental justice and the political ecology of water and energy. Unfortunately, Dr. Aung Tung Oo was unable to join this panel due to personal reasons. So the next panelist is Dr. Diana Suhadiman from the International Water Management Institute in Laos. Diana is a research group leader in the water governance and inclusion. It's a research group leader in water governance and inclusion at the International Water Management Institute. Her research highlights the complex and contested nature of water governance across scale, from transboundary to local. So thank you to all the panelists. I hope that you're all here. Since we have one less panelist, I will give you 10 minutes each to talk about the political issues around water insecurity and different strategies on water diplomacy. So first, I will let the first two panelists speak first. We will follow up with clarification questions, and then we will follow suit with the last two panelists. Does that sound okay? So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Professor Xing Liu.
Yes, thank you, May. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your invitations. I have three key words, which I probably, as the first speakers, I would raise. First is insecurity, water insecurity. The second is political. The third one is regional level. I hope probably our session is not much on the community level, but rather on the regional levels. So for the first word, when I saw the Louis, I remember that we don't know what is security, but we do know insecurity. If we cannot access water, that's the problem. That's the insecurity. Political could be, very different dimensions. I think other panelists will discuss about. The third is regional level. The regional level may not see things the same as local level or national level. So keep these three words in mind. I would like to share two observations. I may not take 10 minutes, okay, but I am willing to take the questions, more hot discussions, which I prefer. So the first point at the regional levels, I think many water insecurity issues, such as flood, drought, are primarily result from climate and its change naturally. As most of us know, Lancang-Mekong is under the monsoon climate zone. Water flow is highly variable. Giving example, at Cambodia, Kratie, the lowest month average flow, or the largest float month, average largest is more than 12 times than the drought, the lowest average month flows. And according to MRC, also 50% of the year of Mekong is either drought and flood. So this is quite natural phenomenon. But as we observed in past several years or long time, this natural phenomena is socially constructed as outcome of human action and transform into socially constructed narrative, even the myth. This narrative have political consequence among different groups or even parent countries. So people can easily, finger point each other as manifest in the media in the past several years. I think if we open newspapers, we often see a lot of discussion and debate about the drought, the cause. We must pay attention this kind of what I call it, natural phenomena and socially construct narratives. As science, as research, we should pay attention to differentiate what is really the nature phenomena and what is really the consequence of the human actions, such as climate change or even the water facilities. We have to recognize, rather not just focus, rather not easily and simply finger point. This cannot solve the problem. That's the one point. The second point I would like to share with all of you is the two architecture water governance can bring additional political implication. What is the 2+ architecture? The first is MRC, is already since even earlier, not just the 95. And recently, it seems that MRC regained its support from riparian government, development partners, and as well as society after Sayaburi dams. All of us know after Sayaburi dam, the credibility, the reputation of MRC is going, it went down, it went very low. But recently, in past 5 years, we see the MRC are actively engaged in the water sector. Same time, Lancang-Mekong Water Corporation is also established and actively working on water issues. The two organizations signed their MOU. However, their cooperation still needs to strengthen and explore further. The most important, we have to observe or even promote the two organizations. That's the plus. Two is MRC and Lancang-Mekong. Plus, it's all of us, as researcher, as the NGOs or communities. How we can, more foster the good relationship. The two sisters' relationship can be very crucial in the future regarding to the water insecurity or water security issues. Their relationship could be complementary, could be competition or co-evolutions. Their relationship will have, we don't know, will have I think is very, very important impact on the water sector, including the water security issues. So far, I just share these two observations or thoughts with all of you. I'm happy to take any questions. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you've set us up for a very interesting discussion. You've talked about narratives and how they're framed, the role of researchers and the role of media in shaping these narratives. So we can talk about that a little bit further. And you've also talked about very important regional actors, the MRC and the Lancang-Mekong Corporation, and their relationship with each other in managing some of the water insecurity issues. So we'll come back to you with questions. Thanks for your introduction for now. Let's move on to Dr. Sin. I think he has a PowerPoint slide. So can we have the slide for Dr. Sin? And Dr. Sin, you can start once you have the slide.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So let me try to share with you some of the idea around the topic that I started with the concept of the insecurity, water insecurity, and related to a flood. And this kind of insecurity will be looking from the lens of the innovation policy and what we call the transformative innovation policy.
Sorry, Dr. Tin.
Yes.
Dr. Tin, please, can you just, yeah, great, handsome.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, good. Good now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So let's move to the next slide, please. I like to start with the statement of the Professor Scott from the Science Policy Research Unit of Sussex University. What he means by transformation change, it's not occur only by new policy. It is a historical process which lasts longer with the active involvement of many policy actors. The new transformative policy should be considered as a mode of proactive response to unpredictable fluctuation which have place in the contemporary changing world. Next slide, please. Okay, so in this policy framework, where is this classified in the three framework, but what I talk is about the last one, the policy framework 3, is called transformative innovation policy. And I quote it also from the author's telling. He meant that in the innovation model operating under the third policy framework, there's no best path to sustainability, income equality, and other social desirable goals awaiting discovery. Instead, the progress of the system innovation involve actor in the selection of the alternative pathways, each capable of establishing yourself a trajectory of systemic change. And if you look at the framework 3, we started from the social and environment challenge. And from there, we define how could we carry out the research innovation and to better serve the social benefit and environmental protection. And from there, we will achieve thereby academic growth. Next slide, please. Now look at what are the key contributors to the high flood occurred at the same time in the Mekong Delta of Vietnam. From the slide, you can see that's coming from the three sources. The first source is coming from around 60% coming from the high flow discharge from the upstream of the Mekong. The second largest portion coming from the high tide flow from the East Sea. And the last is coming from the heavy rainfall continuously. So if they happen if they happen at the same time, it creates a severe flood in the Mekong Delta. Next, please. So here you can see truly through this seasonal calendar, there's different kind of area where the Mekong Delta experience with drought or with the flood. And that's also quite determined how the local community respond to this change in the climate. Next, please. So what we would like to see here in the next slide is what I like to discuss about the water insecurity. It is too much or is it too little water? And what we discussed in the Mekong Delta is recently a kind of transformative change from living with flood to living without flood in the context of uncertainty. So for a long time, people in the past have been living with flood for many generations. Recently, we learned how to live without flood. But recently, in the Mekong Delta, they experienced not to having too much water, but also we experience also having too little water, especially during the dry season. And in this case, in the case of the living with flood, we already have some good example successful in the Mekong Delta, especially in the An Giang province, where local community come up with the innovation to how to live with the flood by turning all the negative aspect or aspect of the flood into something which is useful and positive to the living of life, to making a livelihood of the local people. But recently, we also facing the issue of the drought, and there's also a kind of a local innovation from the local community to come up with some kind of what we call the integrated rice shrimp farming in An Biên district in Kiên Giang province. And as the result of this, there has been a successful case where all different stakeholder and actor coming to exercise or implement the integrated rice shrimp farming system, where they can combine the rice and the shrimp farming to manage the local resources, especially water resources, more effectively, and also thereby also reducing the pollution coming from one exercise activity to other activity. Nick, please. So, as
Dr. Sin,
yes.
Before you move on to the slide, would you be able to talk about some of the political factors that enabled the adoption of innovation in your case study, or any other political factors that you feel has made flood management more difficult?
Okay, so the political actor in the case here is the role of the local community, as well as the local authority to come up with some innovation from the bottom. But at the same time, they got support from the researcher to work on this kind of what we call transformative, transforming of transforming the agriculture system. So in this case, the role of the local authority and the local community are very important. But at the same time, the role of the researcher and the local NGO also played very important role in bridging between the knowledge producer from the research institution and the knowledge user. ETN is at the farmer, or is the farmer or the cooperative.
Yes, thank you very much. I see that there are a couple of questions around the role of researchers in addressing some of the water diplomacy issues. Would you mind if we went to Dr. Singh and answer the same question that you just answered about the role of different stakeholders? Dr. Singh,
okay,
over
thanks.
to you.
Yeah, thanks.
Dr. Sin, I think we are okay now, and we can move on to taking the questions.
Okay. So I'm ready.
Yes, okay. So we'll start with Dr. Singh first. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, great. I take two questions. Why? But they're related to the Chinese ask the questions. What is the role of plus? Yeah, I think plus are very powerful. Yeah, if we can do something very powerful to influence the two sisters. First, I think both sisters, they haven't filled some information, or they are not capable of collect enough information, especially at the community low level, these kind of things. I think that's the role of plus can do. Yeah. The second, it's the two systems may have different priorities, which may differ from what the community or public has. So in that cases, our study, our research can really, feed into their knowledge, their discussion. But we have to, as Dr. Ui Song already suggested, if we can make some difference, we need informal networks to communicate each other, to make our voice very strong to the two systems. So that's the role of us. We can also, probably later I can discuss about as research, not just to raise issues, but what are the solutions at pilot project levels. So we can show, hi, if you do something, then the others, the plus can do a lot of the stuffs. So can really improve the health of the river and other issues. So let's stop. The second question is much more about the flow change as MRC report already said, flow is turning to regulated flow, yeah? But compare with the nature, seasonal and annual change, this flood still only part of it. We have to scientifically assess it and what causes, not put in a myth or simply socially construct as narratives, but is very scientifically based, proven what the causes and what the implications, so that the riparian government can really deal with issues, not finger point each other, which is not very good. As I always said, when China have dialogue with ASEAN, we have the meetings, all of participants, I raise one issue: don't manipulate public as short-term political gains. Government policy can change, you know, one day after another day, but the people's friendship, if you planted hatred in different society, that will take generations. So be careful. As plus, yeah, we can debate. We can debate a lot of issues. We can clarify a lot of issues. That's kind of a thing. That's my observation. Also part of my suggestions. Thank you, Meg.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we can talk later after Carl and Diana have had a chance to talk about the role of data in messaging the public. So before we go on, I'll give you 2 minutes, Dr. Singh, to either respond to the question about the role of plus or the issue of data sharing and changing public perception. But if you don't want to respond right now, that's okay. We can move on and talk about that later in a greater discussion. You're on mute, Dr. Singh.
I can respond this later to this point.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
So Dr. Carl, are you ready?
I am, thanks, May.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, okay, straight away. Thank you so much. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank SEI and SUMERNET for inviting me today, and especially for convening a panel with such interesting questions. I'm really glad to be invited to this panel. And I'd also say it's really good to see some friends and colleagues amongst the participants, some of whom I actually met through SUMERNET. So I'm going to try and tackle the first 2 questions that you shared with us. The first one was to ask about our perspective on what are the main issues contributing to political tension in water management in the region and how these connect to water insecurity. So I'm really glad to be following Professor Liu Jing, who I think has already laid out a lot of the key issues. Just as a little bit of background, although I'm sure many of us are aware of this, even very recently, political tensions became very visible in the drought and the low flows in the Mekong River in 2019 and 2020. And this really drew attention to some of the challenges and limitations of transboundary water governance, especially in relation to water data sharing and how water data informs analysis. And I think actually this is kind of one of those bridges that Dr. Liu Jing was mentioning in terms of the bridge between understanding natural phenomenon and social construction. It is the role of research and knowledge creation. So at the time of this low flow, questions were then also raised regarding whether the low flows were the impact of drought due to a lack of rainfall, or what was the role of storage of water in dam reservoirs. And particular attention was paid towards the hydropower projects in China, as well as recently constructed projects in Laos as well. And I think out of all of that discussion, one of the key issues that emerged was the incomplete availability of real-time data in the public domain on the operation and storage of these projects, that could really have clarified the issues very quickly, actually, if that type of information was available. But then compounding the political tension was the publication of a report in April 2020 by the research consultancy Eyes on Earth. And I won't go into, in the interest of time, I won't go into too much detail on the report itself, but essentially it was a satellite, it was based on satellite data and a model that tried to measure model the natural pre-dam flow of the Lancang-Mekong River and then using the satellite data to ask to what extent dam regulation was influencing downstream water flows in northern Thailand. So this study led to, or increasingly led to, an intense debate over the role of China's mainstream hydropower projects amongst many different actors, between governments, within the media, and also amongst researchers. And I think that's really important for SUMERNET. And so amongst researchers, questions were asked about the research method itself, as well as whether the findings could really demonstrate how much of a role upstream dams were having on low flows. And I think this relates to the panel's theme on uncertainty and how researchers deal with uncertainty in their own findings. So, but this report created even greater tension because the report was published at a time of intensified geopolitics between the United States and China. And I would say that this led to a hydro-politicization of the drought and the politicization of the research itself. And by the politicization of the research, what I mean is that the limitations of the study were basically downplayed in the popular narratives, and the results of the findings themselves were converted into simple media-friendly narratives. I think what this shows in terms of contributing to this panel discussion is that the politicization of research can amplify political tensions. In the longer term, it can also undermine the long-term credibility of scientific evidence that could be the basis of improved deliberative processes of transboundary water governance. But there were responses, there were political outcomes of this tension, and one of them was that in October 2020, China announced that there would be year-round state-to-state water data sharing between China and the MRC from 2 stations in China. I wanted to just mention that separate from this process, there's been a new website published by the US-based Stimson Center that also publishes changing water levels behind dams using satellite-based data. I think that's also quite useful in terms of increasing the transparency of data dam operation in the region. So I think that this period of particular tension has increased intergovernmental cooperation between the MRC and China, and in particular between the LNC and the MRC. And that's an important step towards de-escalating political tensions, like the institutionalization of these arrangements. But there is more that can be done towards addressing insecurity through these intergovernmental mechanisms. That includes expanding the number of monitoring stations upstream in China, but also sharing more water data about the operation of dams in the lower basin as well, both on the mainstream and tributary projects. And that includes water data as well as the effectiveness of their mitigation measures in the way that the projects are operated. I just wanted to add 2 extra points on this and then move on to the topic of water diplomacy. I think it's quite clear that underpinning the political tensions of 2019 and 2020 is a broader set of political tensions around the procedures by which large dams are planned, approved, and operated in the region. And that includes the extent to which there is genuine public participation, as well as how various types of research can influence or not decision-making processes. I think there's a kind of another even deeper level that is worth putting on to a discussion here, which is that there are still also ultimately competing visions over the value, use, and the future of the Mekong River itself, outside of the intergovernmental institutionalization of water governance. So my overall observation would be that the intergovernmental plans tend to emphasize the river as a resource for economic regional integration. And albeit the goal is sustainability, it still emphasizes that particular way of thinking about the river. But there are other visions that have emerged from civil society networks across the region that emphasize how the river sustains local livelihoods and has done for generations and their local economies, but also acknowledges the importance of the river's patterns and values for cultural values as well. So if I still have a bit of time, can I briefly discuss on water diplomacy as a strategy? The second topic that we were asked was what has been the strategy around water diplomacy in the region and what are the pros and cons? So first of all, to just clarify my understanding of water diplomacy. to me, what it means is it's a shift from treating transboundary water as primarily an issue to be managed by technically trained water experts and specialist water agencies to an expanded scope of governmental actors that includes politicians and diplomats who engage in intergovernmental dialogue and diplomatic processes over water-related issues, and the outcomes of those diplomatic processes get delegated back to the water experts. I'm researching on this, and I'm really interested in it as a concept, or perhaps even, as Professor Liu Jing had mentioned, as a narrative in itself. I think water diplomacy is emerging as a narrative in the region, and one limitation of it is that it's very state-centric. So water diplomacy privileges the role of the state and downplays the role of non-state actors, including civil society and riparian community leaders. And in that sense, I see water diplomacy as emerging as a somewhat different concept from other approaches to water governance that has often emphasized the inclusion of a wider range of non-state actors. So then just to briefly talk about some of these, the way that water diplomacy is materializing in the Mekong Lancang Basin, I think in terms of strategy, we can see that the MRC and the LMC are both talking about water diplomacy, but I would suggest that there's potentially different approaches. The MRC, the organization's mandate is primarily water governance. It exists for water governance. And in that sense, it can engage in water diplomacy primarily through the MRC Council, which involves ministerial level members who are basically mandated also to work on water. The LMC can also engage in water diplomacy through the Lancang-Mekong Water Resources Cooperation Center, but we need to see the LMC as a bigger institution. So it involves a wider framework that is structured around 3 cooperation pillars on political and security issues, economic and sustainable development, and social, cultural, and people-to-people exchanges. So in a recent paper with a colleague, David Davominic, we were looking at the idea of hydropolitics of reciprocity in practice in the Mekong Lancang Basin. And I can share the paper with those that who might be interested to read it. But one of the things that we suggested was that a strategy within the LMC around water diplomacy contextualizes water the agenda that's beyond water alone. So what I want to therefore suggest is that water diplomacy through the MRC really could focus on water, but through the LMC, water diplomacy is contextualized to a range of other issues that reflect the wider LMC agenda. Secondly, if I have 1 minute left, is that okay, May?
1 minute, please.
Okay.
Yes.
In terms of the practices of water diplomacy, I think we could actually point to an example of water data sharing that I mentioned earlier. Water data sharing has progressively expanded since the 1990s. And I think in terms of water diplomacy, water data sharing is a foundation of trust building and evidence-based cooperation between the riparian states. And actually the improved water data sharing has increased transparency because the water data is put online for the public. But I think there's also a limitation in this way of thinking about water data sharing and water diplomacy because it's mainly sharing scientific data that's more suited to the type of water governance that's intergovernmental or what researchers can use. But the limitation is that it's now widely recognized that for inclusive and sustainable development, including water governance to take place, many types of knowledge are needed. Scientific knowledge is important, but also situated community knowledge, civil society research, and so on. And I think actually Dr. Louis Labelle's work of SUMERNET has been really key to emphasize this over the years. So all forms of knowledge have strengths and limitations, and they need to be combined together to produce actionable data, actionable water data. But at present, there's actually a lot of examples of community-generated knowledge and civil society-generated knowledge, including through the SUMERNET partners. But there's not a clearly established mechanism for that type of knowledge to go back into the intergovernmental institutions that are practicing water diplomacy. So I think this is kind of a limit of water diplomacy at present. So
Carl,
that's where I will
sorry.
finish off. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
That would be an example of Professor Liu Jing's plus. Thank you so much.
Exactly. Yes, I think this is a good cutoff point so that we can talk more about the role of PLUS and how they can be integrated into other institutions that already exist. So I think it's a good segue. So please hold on to your thoughts. Diana, are you ready for your 10 minutes?
Yes, thank you, May. I think most of the thing that I would like to share and say during this panel discussion actually have already been shared by earlier panelists. So I think that makes my job a lot of easier to focus mostly on this particular aspect that probably has been implied but never really emphasized or talk about directly, which is the issue of the politics of knowledge production and reproduction. I mean, we talk about the need to have transparent and open access to information. We talk about the role of research in transboundary water governance. We talk about the pros and cons of water diplomacy. And I think one element that maybe I would like to highlight is more on the issue of representation and accountability, which is very much linked also to rights-based approaches to transboundary water governance, because I think that rights-based approaches is we can say that is something that's probably been missing in the context of transboundary water governance if we discuss it from a state-centric, from an intergovernmental institutional analysis, or even from a water diplomacy lens. Why? Because I think the rights perspective there is very much approached from the angle of the state and from the angle of the formal law and institutions, and less looking at the way local indigenous communities shape and reshape their customary rights system, and how this kind of two kind of meet in the context of development intervention, or in the context of hydropower development, in the context of floods and drought mitigation, etc., etc. So I think it's more about, I mean, my observation and contribution would be more about like positioning this this other side of the story, or this other side of knowledge central in our discussions. Why? Because I think when we talk about politics and the politics, how to navigate this this politics of information sharing or data collection or scientific research, I think we can agree that this make the issue of scientific research also not as universal as we want before, because everything has been politicized. So I think in that respect, as a response to that aspect, I think there is also a need to really highlight the need to create more political spaces and to engage and to create spaces and enabling plural voices to emerge, both from the ground and across level. I mean, I'm not talking like in the context of only local communities, but also having a more engagement and create more spaces where plural views and plural voices, different strategies can come up, can emerge and intertwine. And why? Because I think at the moment, the situation has also become very complex. There are so many different narratives, some conflicting, some complementary. There is so many different disconnects at very different governance level. So I think we can agree that there is no single formula where we can say, okay, this is where we have to go. So in that respect, I would highlight and I would kind of like flag the need to have these plural voices coming together, because only by including as many as possible key actors and key stakeholders across level, then we can overcome the challenges in water governance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to all of the panelists for such interesting discussions so far. So I think I've distilled some of what you've said so far into a couple of key points, and I'll summarize them, and then we can go straight to the audience questions. So first is about priorities in the basin and cooperation. So it is essential for priorities to be aligned in order to have a pathway towards effective cooperation. And the priorities, are they economic, are they social, or are they a combination of both, or are they more sustainability oriented? The next is the crucial issue of data sharing. How do we share data effectively? What is a way to share data so that politics can be minimized? And then the last is about messaging and discourse. How can this data be interpreted so that we have clarity on how to manage the political situation around water management? So August, if you don't mind putting up the questions that I've prepared, we'll use these as a backdrop, but I would like to go to the participant questions first. So there is one question from Richard Gronwald about water science and data sharing. So Richard, if you don't mind asking that question in person, would you be able to ask?
I don't definitely mind.
Yeah, go on.
Thank you for sharing. My name is Richard Greenberg. I'm from Yunnan University, from Institute of International Rivers and Ecosecurity. And my question is actually related to politicization of water science. Recently, as actually Carl Middleton already mentioned about the SUMERNET study, and of course, Mekong Dam Monitor, which are very useful tools for sharing more information and get access actually for the local people. But at the same time, let's say the official and public media image is a little bit different, and there is also a lot of overthinking over the drivers, over the impacts and stuff. So nowadays we are actually more seeing like the discussion where the water-related issues are actually put in a non-water-related context and other narratives. So if you can briefly also emphasize, if is it like a real challenge actually for the future research, or is it just let's say just temporary obstacle? I would just be very grateful for any comments. Thank you.
Do you have a specific panelist, or should we ask all volunteers? Okay, would anyone like to answer Richard's question? I think it relates most to you, Carl.
I was sure. Thanks, May, and thank you, Richard, for the question. I was just trying to jot down a couple of thoughts. I think actually this is a really key challenge for many researchers in general about how research has impacts and how research is communicated. Perhaps just one initial thought that kind of immediately comes to mind. So, there are well-established research mechanisms to ensure the quality of research, and obviously the main one is peer review. Peer review takes place in conferences, peer review takes place through academic journals, and that ultimately builds the reputation of the journals and the quality of work that's produced. But there's also a challenge for that process, especially for journal publications, in that it takes so long, and many of the issues that come up around water governance seem more immediate. So I think when I think about the importance of peer-reviewed research, it's important as providing an established body of knowledge that helps us structure and understand what's happening in water governance in the region, but it can't always be reactive to the immediate issues. So that's one thought. But then I think this is where the responsibility of researchers is to also actively engage, building from their research process, their kind of founded research, to engage in public discussion as and when it's important to do so. So writing in newspapers, writing blogs, connecting research, their research agendas to the issues of the day in a way that is credible and consistent with the ethics of the research process. The other thing that I would just flag is that this kind of turn towards transdisciplinary research or co-produced knowledge, I think, is also really important, that we need to recognize that this kind of traditional approach of producing scientific research is also being rethought in the ways that different types of social science and physical science knowledge can be co-produced with other practitioners, including communities, policymakers, and so on, to produce knowledge that is owned and influences policy debates, and ultimately is also published according to the scientific process that I mentioned earlier. So those are a couple of initial thoughts for me. Thanks.
Thank you. Do other panelists have an idea on contribution or what to say about credible research, particularly around water governance and politics?
May I? May?
Yes, please.
May I?
Yes.
I think the very difficult from experience we discussed that the academic is required, you know, in a way academic looks like academics. The outcome is publications. They may not interest in public communication, policy brief. They have different way of writing, different way of the thinking. How can, you know, research or academic can really do this kind of the job? That's really the big challenges. So I'm not very clear about this. Probably we need the middleman. What is middleman is a think tank. The think tank is not much on the policy, it's toward the policy, but also more scientific based. But the difficulty is the think tank also, you know, before they produce their product, they already have their aims. Yeah, this is scientific or not. So it's really challenged about, I think the call suggests probably the, you know, the debate among the different stakeholders around some key issues, probably it's a good thing. I can also relate to your question and Diana's, the suggestions. In fact, I remember a paper by Louis and Massal, the political of scale. Yeah, at different scale, the issue is different. Upgrade another scale, the issue becomes different. So it's very difficult to cross this kind of the scale, the relation, the water relation, and the issues, the government, the governance, all kind of this stuff. This is one thing we have to keep in mind. The second question also very tough, difficult. 6 countries, include China. The states have very strong mind about the sovereignty. So that's kind of the constraints also put us a lot of pressures. Hi guys, it's our business, yeah? It's not yours. So this kind of the mental siding is also difficult. It's also challenging for the research. But unless we have good relation with the, you know, the policy makers, it's very difficult to, you know, to feed them any information. Yeah, that's kind of the thing.
Thank you, Carl and Dr. Singh. Yeah, thank you. Before I come to you, Richard, I think there are a number of questions around research, and you know, as researchers, we have our own biases. We have a certain stance. So some participants are interested in how do we take into account the political sensitivities in researching water insecurities? How does water politics influence or impact our research objectives? And another related question is about how can research navigate politics? So before we come to you, Richard, Diana and Dr. Singh, would you like to add something related?
Okay, so okay, yeah. I would like to share some of my insight from being a researcher. How can you communicate effectively your research? We as academics tend to focus more on our publication published in the well-known journal And that is a good thing, but it's not all the thing that the scientists should do. And I think that the way that the scientists should redefine is as how to unpack those research findings into different form of knowledge, carry messages. So in such a way that certain information can be understood and easy understood by publish. And in this case, we as scientists or researchers should also publish in some local newspaper. So about the thing that we think is important for the local at the local level, and that's thing I think that should also change the way how we produce the knowledge or how we communicate the knowledge. But also I see also other coming way of communicate is using the social the media like the webs the Facebook, and that is something that I think a researcher we have to be a little bit more socially responsible for sharing the knowledge that they produce. That is some my observations.
Great, thank you, Dr. Sin. Yes, it's important for us to share our research so that it is digestible for the public, but Dr. Sin has noted that it is also important to manage the messaging so that it doesn't become false and lead to public outcry or scare. Diana, would you like to add something about this?
Yes, thank you, May. I think I just put a link in the chat box about, I think the discussion also kind of highlight the need to bridge the two, right? The policy outcome, the policy processes, and how the way we do research how academic research and policy processes can be like bridged. And I think one of the way we did that for our project on land and water governance research under the policy institution and markets is by creating tools. So based on our field research and on our publication, we create different scenarios for board game to kind of, but we design the game in such a way that it promotes collective action and open spaces for local communities and other key players, either it's government actors, NGOs, civil society organization, university or academics, to come up with the game is designed in such a way that the collective action, that they would have to think of a way how to collectively act to respond to a specific situation rather than just acting individually. So I think that can be also a way to open mind in terms of highlighting the importance of collective actions through like scenario experience based on real life research informations. And another thing I think that that I would say about like the, oh, sorry, but that was the next question, right? About the political sensitivity and navigating the politics. So I will leave it. I will leave it for the next round. Yes, thank you.
Okay, excellent, thank you. So thank you very much to all the panelists. We'll come back to you, Richard, full circle, so that we close off this segment of the discussion. And afterwards, I see that Dr. Apichai, you have a question about regional bodies and their role. So I'd like you to ask the question so that we can discuss more about the regional bodies and their role in managing the politics of water security. So Richard, and then after you, Apichai.
Thank you for the word. I just would like to only add the issue actually of the responsibility. It was already mentioned a few times, like basically the research ethics and responsibility also of the researchers to publish on the social media and public media. I think it's a great tool to raise the public awareness, but at the same time, it can be also really great actually spot for the misinterpretation and overreaction over certain comments. So that's as also Carl Middleton also mentioned, the peer review process is definitely one of the tools which can also be used actually in academia, but at the same time it's very very long and then also very complicated. And of course, a lot of people may not also understand the academic jargon. So the middle kind of actor, which was already mentioned by Professor Sin Liu, it's actually definitely a good idea, but I'm more asking and more thinking about some kind of responsibility of the code of conduct. It was also mentioned previous time in Lancang-Mekong multi-stakeholder platforms and other initiatives. I'm just wondering, is it really the issue? Because nowadays it's more that non-governmental organizations, they are getting more power, more voice, but at the same time, there is not so many platforms where they can, how should I say, be among the equals. I don't know how to explain better. So thank you.
Yeah, I understand. So let's talk quickly about the role of the regional bodies first, and then let's close up with a discussion about good principles for cooperation. I think that relates to Richard's question. So Dr. Apichai, are you available to ask your question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I mean, basically, you know, about 2 months ago, we had ASEAN and the MRC conducted their first inaugural ASEAN-Mekong Water Security Dialogue. And it was planned to have such fora biennially, that's every 2 years. So my question to the panelists is, do you feel that there is some constructive role for ASEAN to play in the 2+ paradigm context that has already been mentioned? You know, after all, China and some of the plus partners are already engaged with both MRC and ASEAN. Thank you.
Would any panelists be interested in taking this question about the role of ASEAN?
Yeah, may I?
Yes, please, go ahead.
I'm not familiar with other, just from the what I learned from China side, for Chinese side. In fact, we also have a lot of discussion about this Lancang-Mekong cooperation, but most of the scholars agree that the China Lancang-Mekong cooperation is much under the China-ASEAN framework. Not otherwise, but the Lancang-Mekong cooperation is more focused on the Mekong issue itself. This for the principle, for framework, it's China-ASEAN. That's the most of the scholar think about in China side. That's probably the one suggestions for can China and ASEAN discuss more, you know, sub-regional issues. That have to decided by the China-ASEAN levels. That's the one my response. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Singh. Would anyone else like to add anything? If not, we have only about 10 minutes left. So I'd like to ask all of the panelists to think about what are principles of good cooperation for water diplomacy in the region. And I'll give you about 2 minutes each to answer that question. Dr. Sin, would you like to start first?
So I think my first key principle in this water governance is transparency and accountability, as well as cost sharings.
Okay, thank you. And you know my follow-up question will be, how do we ensure that, right? We'll come back to that afterwards. All right, Diana, would you like to have a go?
Thank you, May. So I think my main message would be in the context of water diplomacy, there is this assumption that everyone, I mean, there is this need, I think, to have to try to create or to try to support the emergence of equal playing field because we know we talk about water diplomacy as if there is no power asymmetry. So I think really incorporating the issue of power relations in the discussion and implementation of water diplomacy could be key. And I think using water diplomacy as an entry point to create equal playing fields within the discussion table to start with is I think very important.
Thank you, Diana. Carl?
Thanks very much. I guess I'm still puzzling a bit over what we might mean by water diplomacy. I think probably a first step is to be really clear on what water diplomacy actually means. If it is something that is very state-centric or something beyond that. So a discussion on what water diplomacy is would be a good starting point. But I do think then the opportunity in water diplomacy is to move beyond a kind of technocentric scientific thinking of water management and broaden out the discussion about water governance to wider political processes. But I think that has to depend upon the inclusion of many voices that I think also Diana was emphasizing. And I really agree with Diana's point that we can't see water diplomacy in the in a kind of vacuum separate from the power relations both between the states as well as between state and non-state actors. So I see opportunity within water diplomacy as an idea, but we probably need to discuss also what that means. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. And last but not least, Dr. Zeng.
Yeah, probably we have tomorrow. In fact, tomorrow I will organize the session, discuss about this kind of the issue, water diplomacy in China, in another platform. I agree with Carl. I think water diplomacy, what the aim? We have to ask ourselves, what the aim? In fact, from international relation perspective, it's each state can through the dialogue to, to really change or modify, adapt some change of the state behavior or policy, which could be, coherent or more collaborative to achieve a common goals. It could be success. It cannot success. It depends on different, given the Mekong, the nature of the Mekong, it's really viable. If we're dealing with viable at a different level, what the principle I suggest is flexibility. You have keep the flexibility as the one principle for the water diplomacy. Thank you.
Okay, coming full circle back to the discussion about plus, and here are the principles you all have highlighted: transparency and accountability in cooperation, equalizing power and incorporating power issues into in diplomacy, moving beyond technocratic styles of management, and also really thinking about the aim of water diplomacy. So what do you think the role of us as researchers, or the plus, in incorporating these principles, and how do we ensure that we incorporate these principles in the work that we do and to enhance water governance in the region? Would anyone like to jump in first? I think, can I ask Diana to jump in first? I think you are working with the MRC in your research, and you have thought a lot about this in your research. So can I ask you to kick off this discussion?
Yes, thanks, May. Can you repeat the question one more time? Because I think I missed the first part of the sentences.
So basically, what is our role in ensuring all of these principles are incorporated in water governance in the region?
Yeah, so I think the first step I would take is really recognizing that the role of the researchers is far from neutral or apolitical. I think the way we design our research, the way we frame our research interests, the things we want to look, the things we want to know, the debate we want to contribute, I think that those include all the choices we already made. So I think recognizing those choices also very important in make sure that we conduct the research as as ethical as possible, in the sense that you are not conducting your research to kind of support your own argument. So it's your own conscience, in the sense that of course you think this will be the outcome, but at the same time, I think as a researcher you also have to come with the set of verification technique and methods, and continuously working in a robust way to triangulate your data in as many possible way. And at the same time, I think also you have to also make a conscious choice in terms of whose perspective you want to highlight, you know, because I think understanding the MRC or the LMC, their relationship, and also looking at how local communities and NGO and CSO are part of the conversation or not. I think you make a choice in determining what would be the focus of your research in terms of how you want to advance not only just the research, but also the policy discussion, because sometimes you think, okay, it's interesting thing to do, how to see how certain institutions work, how certain institutions can or cannot do things, what are their opportunities and challenges, and how to make it works at regional level. But at the same time, I think it's also very insightful to link those notions of regional water governance with the local context again. And I'm always advocating to kind of having more and more emphasis on these local studies. Why? Because I think conducting these local studies more and more also kind of enable us to capture the local voices that are often missing in the global or regional or national debate. Hope it answers your question.
Can I have some response?
Yes.
Yeah, I think as I mentioned in my first slide, we are now more concerned about how can we do our research more transformative, make some transformative change. And in this regard, so we have to start it with what are the grand challenge, what are the society is facing, and from there we can determine how research and innovation can contribute to this. And in this kind of mindset, I think the way we deal with this is more related to the challenges and the grand challenges, which are very uncertain in the nature. And that kind of thing is quite a new way of redesign our research in the first place. And in this regard, I think it is not always important to find the solution to the problem, but is another way to think more critically. Is there any alternative way to develop or to the mainstream development? And this kind of thing that required the role of quite critical view on this. And this, if we can open more political space where there are different voices, different view can be gathered in this space, then we can have a better alternative choice.
May I follow?
Yes.
May I follow the thing?
Very quickly, please.
Yeah, very quickly. I think I follow just one point. We cannot increase the water supply. What we can do in the future. So I strongly suggest, I also agree with the first sessions. We have to use water smart use the water. So in the future, the research have focused on the reasonable use of water, effectively use water, water saving, demand manager, whatever this could be in the future. Where sooner or later we have to face that. The second point I would follow the Diana said. I think that each scale they have their authority, they have their issues. So if our research can really relate to different scale, yeah, really interesting, then we may, make some more strong voice or useful for. Thank you. That's it. 2 points.
Okay, thank you very much for all of the panelists for your contributions. I think we had a really interesting dialogue. We do have a Q&A right after this, so I hope that we can continue our discussions here. There's a lot that we covered, but there are still a lot of questions on water management in the basin that we can still continue to talk about. So thank you very much again, and I'll hand back over to Leonie now.
Great. A big thank you to May and the whole panel there. I think it was terrific to hear a different perspective. I mean, this morning I felt we talked a lot about the importance of exchanging knowledge across the whole river and across the different disciplines, plus the need for researchers to strengthen ties to ensure that we can get and share insights for the whole, from the Lancang all the way down to the Mekong. And then this afternoon, we really heard a lot more about data sharing and its importance of using and acknowledging the multiple types of knowledge and the co-production of knowledge. I agree with May. There's so many more questions that we could be asking about this. And I see in the chat, again, we've had a really rich discussion, questions around how do you engage the stakeholders? What are some of the political issues that you need to consider with your research? So I'd like to thank everyone in the chat as well. Okay, so this session, we've got about 10 minutes really for any of those last minute burning questions that you might have. And ideally, you'd have one of these questions that's really going to focus on the contemporary dynamics of addressing water insecurity, which is what we're here to be talking about today, from the researchers to policy impact end. So while you're thinking up those questions, I have a question for you. I felt that today we had a great discussion, bit of to and fro, a bit of tension in what we were presenting, but there were also some really nice moments, I felt, where we actually learned something from each other. Coming back to Louis's point that today is really about the exchange of knowledge and to strengthen some of your ties. So I would like to ask everyone in the chat if they can drop down what at least one thing that they have got out of today's session. So what's their key take-home message? So I'll write that question down, but what is your key take-home message from today? And the reason that we're asking this is that everyone here is providing some new insight. And we had a couple of questions about clarifying, what do you mean by hydro diplomacy? What do you mean by private sector? And therefore, I think each of us is also getting something separate and different from today's discussion. So if people could start to drop in the chat, what is your take-home message? What's something that you learned today, or something that you're going to take away, either do differently, perhaps it's an action, perhaps it's a piece of knowledge, maybe it's someone to connect with. What is your takeaway here? Okay. So while we've got that happening in the chat session, if someone could please put in a response, that'd be great. That means that I'll be able to come back to you. But while we've got that here, I wanted to just pop back to one of the questions that was asked in the earlier panel, and really highlighting the fact, I think, bringing the two panels together. And I'm going to ask if any of the panelists would like to respond. So the question is that climate change is only one of the factors that's influencing the Lancang-Mekong and its water management. the question is about how about the effect of hydropower development, the causes of resettlement, the changes in data management, and the relations related to challenging living conditions that are affected by the community. Also how they're addressing the water insecurity matter. So I was wondering if any one of our panelists would like to answer this question. And I guess I was hoping that someone from each of the panels might be there or available to answer the question. Do we have anyone from panel 1 still available? Perhaps Dr. Wu Yu-song or Dr. Apisong, are you there? Would you like to answer this question? No? Okay. So clearly some of the people from the earlier panel have moved on. Well, then I'd like to ask someone from the second panel, Professor Singh, would you like to address the question about climate change is one of the challenges, but how is the fact that we actually have these multiple factors and challenges happening at the same time, the COVID, climate change, hydropower development, and the influence that this has on communities. How do you think all of those challenges are affecting the water insecurity issue across the Lancang-Mekong? Professor Singh, are you still there? Professor Singh?
Yeah, we have two things in fact. I think you asked Dr. Singh's. My family name is Lu. Yeah,
Lu.
is Lu.
Sorry.
Yeah. So just call me Shin. It's okay. So I think this is a really difficult time. Not just the climate change, and also climate change give the justice for more water facilities, energy crisis recently, yeah, and also pandemics, geopolitical competitions, and really what is the issue in the region? You have many issues, livelihood, food security, as well as, economic demand. So how you really address these kind of the issues and secure people? One way is what we call it state core. Keep what we are doing, yeah? Another way, I think the government is much more pushing, right, parent for the economic development, for that kind of the state building or nation buildings, this kind of a thing. So it's quite very difficult. I think at different levels, we can discuss different, like two sisters, they have to really discuss about the Lancang-Mekong as a whole. What can riparian government do, and what the role of PLUS can really, contribute to the water governance in the region. But at the different levels, they got a lot of pressures. In China's, like in Dali, Mekong, from the Beijing, the political pressure is conservation, Lake, beautiful. But if we see, do we ready to provide additional solution to local livelihood? If you have the very strong political commitment and, push a lot for local to conservations, how about livelihood? Do we really have this kind of thing? So recently I visited there, have the study with the local community and the local official really trying to address this kind of issue. I really hope as PLUS can we really do different levels research, really support about, these kind of the issues to to really solve. I think after pandemic, livelihood pandemic will make government and the local official rethink about livelihood security. What we can do. So a lot of the discussion is already there. I really hope SUMERNET and can really have some research across the region to really look at this issue at a different scale to find the solutions for that. Thank you. This event is a good initiative, and I really hope we can continue this kind of the sharing the knowledge or even debate. I like hot debate. It's okay as long as we, really try to address real issue, people concerns, society concern, and the government concerns. It's fine, yeah. We can have different opinion, sure. Let's exchange, as Louis said earlier. Okay, thank you, Leonie.
Thank you. Thank you. And you raised many points there. One, that we do come from our different perspectives. And whilst we may not agree, we can certainly be more informed, whether the debate is hot or whether the debate is perhaps more calm or emergent. It will come with time. You also raised the importance of working right down at the local level. And whilst a lot of the discussion in this panel has been at that higher political regional level, that we must be working all the way down to the local level. And I guess I'd like to ask Dr. Diana now, who has done a lot of work at the local level, to perhaps also answer the question. So knowing that it's not just climate change or COVID or hydropower development, but how is the effect of all of these things having on water insecurity issues at the community level?
Thank you, Leonie. So I think my response would be to say that the local communities are also very much aware about these problems that we see at the regional level in the context of climate change, for example, and development interventions in the context of hydropower, or even COVID travel restrictions and the closing of national borders, and I think it would be one thing that I always find it interesting is to really learn from their experience as to how they adapt to the changing situation. Because I think they are the front runner of any, researchers look at it from a distance with our different lenses, but I think local communities confronted by these changes or by these different types of external forces coming in on their farming practices or on their local livelihoods, I think they are very highly pressured to come up with some level or some kind of adaptation strategies. And I think understanding and unpacking and recognizing that strategies are also key to build our responses at the other level, and also to bring this type of knowledge and this type of strategies and this type of mechanisms that work at the local level or not as part of the discussion. So I would say that while looking at local communities sometimes come from a perspective of inclusions, I think in so many different ways, in so many different contexts, I think understanding how they cope with the current changes in terms of climate, but also in the context of agrarian transition, for example, would give us a lot of insights, because I think they are the key actors when we talk about adapting to change.
Thank you, Diana. Terrific. That's a really great place for us to finish. I note that we have run out of time, even though I know there are more questions that are coming through. One of the questions that has come through on the chat, and I guess I'd like to leave on this, and I'll hand over to May as the final wrap. And the question is, Are the experts across the Lancang-Mekong within and outside the basin, are they really aware of their colleagues and the different fields from whom they can establish some future collaboration? And perhaps this is a way that while you're putting in what your key messages are from today, if you'd like to also mention what are the networks, what are the ways that you connect with your colleagues, your researchers or your policymakers across the whole region? And then people would also be able to understand where they sit as well. So for example, for me, that would be through the SUMERNET program, but I know that there are many other programs out there and also other networks as well. So please also feel free to drop those in the chat. Thank you. I'll wrap the end of the Q&A now and I'll hand over to May as a close, but thank you all for your great participation.
Okay, thank you, Leonie. So I've jotted down some notes and I hope it captures all of the robust discussion that we had today. So generally we talked, this is a research forum, so we talked about the role of us as researchers and how we can be, how we can uncover some of the insecurities and the vulnerabilities related to water and also what we can do about it. So in the first session, we talked about how COVID has exacerbated vulnerabilities because of decline in tourism, because of water pollution, and how this has affected the vulnerable. So the research from the first panel talks about the vulnerabilities amongst the poor and also the people who are unrecognized legally. So the informal settlers, the migrant workers, and the difficulties that they have in accessing water. We also spoke about how we can protect some of the people that are vulnerable. So the government, of course, has a role in welfare, but also the private sector, but with caution. So we have to ensure that there's no price gouging and that the private sector is responsible. So in the second session, we spoke about what really is the aim of water diplomacy. We have all these regional bodies, we have us as researchers, but do we have a common cause, a common aim to have a secure water basin to ensure water sustainability in the region? We also talked about data sharing and how sensitive they can be. And lastly, we spoke about our role in doing the research and the messaging that we put out, because this can have implications on how the public perceives water issues, but it can also action regional bodies into doing something about the water insecurities that we face. So that's it from me. So back to you, Leonie.
Excellent. Thank you, May. That's terrific. Well, in closing off today, I'd just like to remind us from where we started. So today was all about the Sustainable Mekong Research Network, organising a 2-day event, really focusing on the Lancang-Mekong Research and Policy Forum on strengthening research policy cooperation and partnerships to address water security in times of uncertainty in the Lancang-Mekong region. This is part of the SUMERNET annual meeting, and it's really, it's a 2-day event. But what we've tried to do here is today we've really tried to focus in this research forum, this first day, is an open space for senior and young researchers and practitioners from the upper and lower countries of the Lancang-Mekong region to exchange knowledge and to really strengthen ties and networks across the whole region. It's financially supported by and experiences on various issues related to water insecurity. And the aim is to strengthen our networks and partnerships in the region. I believe that this today was not a success without the terrific panelists that we have. So I'd like to thank all of the panelists for their time and their preparation, but also in sharing openly and willingly with our whole set of participants here and today. I'd also like to say this success only came because of our great participants. At one stage, we had almost 110 people online listening, taking part in chats, engaging fully in the messages and ideas that were shared across. And then lastly, I'd like to thank CEDA, our funder, for this particular event, but also the SUMERNET Secretariat and the SUMERNET Steering Committee for all the effort and time that's been put in to make this event such a success. But with that said, with all my thanks, I'd also really like to encourage you that tomorrow is another day which will have some great discussions, and we'll be continuing the quest for strengthening the research policy cooperation and partnerships to address water security in times of uncertainty in the Lancang-Mekong. So a big thank you to everyone, and good afternoon for the day.